What's up with Cars? No, seriously, I'm asking, what is the deal with the Cars universe? When thinking about what I wanted my next video to be, I considered doing another Pixar theory or another funny, over-the-top theory about a kid's franchise, like my Toy Story Cognito Hazard theory, which so many of you seem to like. But after thinking on it for a while and perusing through the Pixar catalog, I realized I couldn't think of anything. So I decided to go back to the drawing board and come up with another Deltarune video, as the most important factor in making these videos is quality, and if I don't have a strong foundation for a theory, there's no point. Wait a second. Why do the cars in Cars have door handles? Not only that, but why do they have windows? Wouldn't that only make sense if there were humans involved? Now, this might be a silly question. You think that it's nonsense, that doesn't mean anything, but the animators thought about it too. Look at the cars. Their windows are very clearly tinted or blocked by something. Before you get frustrated with me, this is not another examining the anatomy type videos where I'll tell you that cars have gross organs inside of them that they need to keep out of view. Although, honestly, that is a pretty interesting idea. No, instead, this is more about the Cars universe as a whole. What is going on here? Because what seems at first to be a very simple answer suddenly gets complicated when you think about what it would actually mean to live in a world devoid of humans. My name is Spookydood, make sure to like and subscribe, and before we discuss, I want to ask you, do you like my content? Would you like almost 4 hours of exclusive videos that you can't find anywhere on YouTube with more being uploaded every week? Would you also like patron-exclusive theory reviews where I'll review your theories and then also upload them to YouTube? Well, for only $3, you can subscribe to my Patreon, where you'll get all of that and more. I'd really appreciate it as I try to make this more of my full-time job. Thank you so much for supporting me and my channel. Now, let's discuss. I think the big question we need to ask here is whether or not humans ever existed in the Cars universe. The biggest problem with the world of Cars is that it doesn't make sense. Not just in the obvious sense that a society of cars is inherently silly and improbable, but also that 90% of the world shouldn't exist. The Cars universe has standards and cultural norms and practices that only make sense in a human-dominated world. Cars have doors. Why? That shouldn't make sense unless humans exist. The only reason doors exist are to let humans in, right? Well, I think we need to introduce a sort of chart here. Anyone who's a fan of this channel knows that I like to break out the charts that I periodically add text to, and this is no different. Evidence for and against humanity ever existing in the world of Cars. The first piece of evidence, well, obviously car doors only make sense if humans exist, right? Well, yes and no. See, as I was writing this section, I had an episode of the most recent Disney Plus show, Cars on the Road, on in the background. The one where Mater dies. Oh yeah, you didn't know that Mater died? Well, he did. And in this episode, after going way too fast, he meets the equivalent of Cars' God. He tries to negotiate with her for a while to return to his body, only for her to tell Mater that this cannot happen. But Mater manages to trick God, no, I'm still not kidding, and comes back to life. How does he do this? Well, he uses his spirit to kick the door open and climb inside. This is, as far as I'm aware, one of, if not the only time we see a car door open across the entire Cars franchise, and it's to implant the soul of Mater back inside his body. Okay, I'm not necessarily saying that this is the only purpose for car doors existing, but the fact that Mater's soul returns to his body lends to the idea that perhaps the inside of the cars really is meant to represent the inside of their bodies. Am I saying they all have, organs and gross stuff inside of them? No, probably not, but at the very least, like I said, there is an alternative explanation for doors and windows that doesn't involve humanity. Perhaps it's simply meant to represent the car's insides. Therefore, we've sort of got two arguments here. On the side of humans must have existed, we've got the fact that car doors exist, proving that that humans must have existed, because otherwise why would they be there? But on the side of humans never existed, you've got the fact that car doors could be used as a sort of stand-in for, human biology, in the sense that they only exist because they're meant to be the inside of cars' bodies, like the access to that. And so you've got an argument on both sides. Which of those two you believe is up to you. I know what you're probably thinking. Spookydood, aren't their parts meant to be their organs? Like, their mechanical parts? But that assumption would be incorrect. You see, there are actually several instances in which car parts are out and about. They have crashes and their parts are exposed, and they very frequently show these pieces lying around. No one ever really expresses any disgust at this, nor is it treated in such a way that you're meant to think that they're their organs. Mater has his hood completely removed, and yet nobody acts like his inner chest is exposed. Similarly, we see spare parts lying around as if it's nothing. Cars are modified in the second movie to have weapons attached to them, and these aren't meant to be biological implants or anything like that. My point is, the exterior car parts aren't biological stand-ins. The only instance of anything acting as a real biological stand-in is either their eyes, their oil, or their interiors. Do with this information what you will. Personally, I think it lends to the argument that the reason cars have doors are specifically to act as biological stand-ins, rather than to let humans inside of them. Okay, so before we move on, are there any other references to biology that we'll need to know about? Yes, actually. Also in Cars on the Road, in an episode where Lightning and Mater become actors in a movie, the movie in question features zombie cars with brains. Considering it's a pretty safe bet that the cars themselves don't have brains unless they're inside their bodies, it seems like the only way they'd know about brains is because of humans. Unless, of course, they do in fact have brains inside their bodies. See, this is where we get to one of the most popular fan theories already out there, that cars are actually sort of like bugs, hard outer shells protecting an inner biological structure. Surely you've seen the fan art of the inside of Lightning McQueen depicting fleshy organic systems and brains on the inside. Many have suggested that this is what the cars truly are. Also, animator, director, and storyboard artist Rob Gibbs, who worked on the Cars films, was featured in a YouTube video posted by Disney where he talks about the biology of cars. In it, he specifically says, in reference to Lightning McQueen, he can't open his doors because that's where his brains are. This seems to be official confirmation, however I would like to add, there are several instances in this video in which obvious joke suggestions were made. Gibbs talks about how the artists were struggling to figure out how Lightning could produce a map to show another character. So they suggested tons of humorous suggestions, like a monkey comes out of the window and hands it to her, Lightning makes a holographic map with his eye, Lightning realizes he can't open the map and dies after sitting there for 150 years, etc. So don't take this statement that his brains are inside of him as official confirmation. Furthermore, there is another piece of evidence that shows cars may not have brains inside of them. In Cars 2, when Mater sees the French car in the market, her eyes are on her headlights rather than her windshield, and you can see clearly that there is nothing out of the ordinary inside of her. No brains, nothing. Now, again, to be fair, Mater reacts oddly to her form, as no other cars have eyes for headlights, so this could be the rare instance of a car that doesn't subscribe to the traditional biology that cars have, but I personally find this more convincing than the Rob Gibbs video. What's my point? Okay, based on the evidence provided, you could either believe one of two things. Either A, cars do in fact have brains. This is an argument in favor of humans never existing in the Cars world, because in the episode where they reference brains, it's because they understand what they are, because they all have brains. Alternatively, you could believe that based on the Cars 2 scene, that cars do not have brains, which would mean that in the aforementioned episode where they show zombie cars with brains, the only way they could have known about brains was because of humans, making it a strong argument in favor of humans existing. Okay, so we've got through the whole biology thing. What about history? This probably should have been our first thought when approaching this topic, but it goes much deeper than you think, and similar to the previous discussion, there are arguments for both sides. Interestingly enough, we can confirm that this is Earth, and not only that, it's our Earth. Mater states that this is the Earth in the end of the Cars on the Road show. Flo also says in this show that Lightning and Mater should head to New Orleans. Not only that, but also in the movie studio episode, Mater is given the role of President of the United States. And yes, they even show an official seal stating that Mater is the President of the United States. I do think there's something to be said about how there's no mention of America. This is simply the United States, but I think it's obviously meant to be our United States. They even reference Baltimore, Maryland in Cars 2. So as far as we can tell, this is our world. But here's where things get interesting. Cars from different countries have different accents. Not only that, but they even speak different languages. In Cars on the Road, Cruz Ramirez says she's learning to speak French. What's really interesting here is that there's no reason for multiple languages to develop if there were never any humans. One of the biggest reasons multiple languages developed in the first place was because of distance. When separated, different groups of people come up with different languages. But this shouldn't have happened in the world of cars. Cars are able to move infinitely faster than human beings, able to traverse great distances at very high speeds without breaking a sweat. So while I understand if a handful of languages were developed, as there are some places that cannot be reached by car, the exact languages that we developed in these same places don't make sense. This is another strong argument in favor of human existence. It's our world and our languages, and that doesn't make sense if humans never existed. Those things wouldn't develop in the same way. Oh, also, the Pope exists. That implies our religions are also existent here, at the very least Catholicism. Again, you could argue that that's proof that humans existed because they pulled that religion from humans, or you could argue that there was a Cars version of pretty much everything that Catholicism believes. Many have suggested that planes and trains existing is proof that humans existed first. After all, why would cars need them to exist? However, Cars 2 proves that they do have some purpose, at the very least planes. Lightning and Mater ride an airplane. You see where my problem is? Just to make a pause here, because I think that we're getting, it's the same thing over and over and over again. There are so many examples of things that should not exist within a society made entirely of cars. They wouldn't develop such small objects specifically intended for hands. Sumo wrestling shouldn't exist as it's based so heavily on the physical bodies of the competitors. They wouldn't have different languages. They wouldn't have our exact states and countries. They wouldn't call themselves the United States. They wouldn't even call themselves cars, as the word comes directly from the Latin word carus, meaning wheeled vehicle or chariot. The entire world should be different, and yet it isn't. It would be so believable to suggest that humans once existed in the world of cars, that the cars inherited their world from us. But the problem is there's an easy second answer. We're not meant to think so much about this. The entirety of the Cars world is just our world, where humans are replaced with cars. Why did they develop languages? Well, because we did, and this is a Cars version of our world. Why is there sumo wrestling? Because we have it, and that's a car version of our world. Again, it's just the same thing. Human world, but cars, and you're not meant to think any deeper. There's no point in wondering why their world is like ours if we can so easily debunk it with the "it doesn't matter" argument. What we need is a smoking gun. Definitive proof that their world cannot exist without humans. And we don't have that, right? Well, there is enough of an argument that I can make. I believe that humans did exist in the world of cars before the cars did. First off, there is what seems to be a very strange rule in the Cars universe. The only way that certain devices can be interfaced with in any way, like pianos, computers, or a variety of other small tools meant for human fingers, are if they're being used by one of those tiny forklift cars. It seems as if they're required to do that work. There's no non-human related reason that so many aspects of the Cars world can only be used by a minority of cars, unless the Cars world developed this caste system in such a way that the forklifts are born into doing this type of work. Which is insane, and if we're meant to think that the Cars world parallels our world, doesn't have any real-world parallel. You see, that's the thing. Looking at how our worlds are similar doesn't lead us into any one direction. But the second you look at the differences, you start to realize that there's lots of very strange inaccuracies that don't line up with our world. Doc Hudson won the Piston Cup in 1951, 1952, and 1953. But the thing is, Doc himself is a 1951 Hudson Hornet, a real-world car. That means that Doc would have had to win the Piston Cup during his first year alive, which doesn't make sense when we see that cars are children at first. Not only that, but I'd also like to mention that Doc has a sticker on him saying Twin H Power, an upgrade for the real-world car that was only available starting for the 1952 model year. All the pictures we see of Doc has this sticker on him. It is possible that he won the Piston Cup in 1951, within a year of existence, that he got this upgrade after his first Piston Cup win, but the fact that it's just, the dates would have to be so specific. It would have to be so quick. He'd have to be born and win his first cup within months of existing, which just doesn't sound right. That's not even the biggest thing, though. There's one other problem. A massive inaccuracy that blows the entire concept of this world being like ours wide open. The Cars film takes place in 2005. In 2005, the average population was about 6.6 billion people. The average person takes up about 2.5 square feet. A rough estimate of the total number of square feet on the Earth is about 5,490,000,000,000,000,000 square feet. This is, keep in mind, not counting the ocean, which takes up about 71% of the Earth's surface. This leaves us with 1,602,000,000,000,000 square feet. That means that 6 billion humans take up about 15 billion square feet, if my calculations are correct, leaving us with lots of square feet left over. But the average car is not 2.5 square feet. Not counting massive trucks, of which we know many exist, and any other larger-sized car, the average mid-sized car is about 120 square feet. That means that, again, not counting all those big cars, a population of 6 billion cars would take up 720 billion square feet. Technically speaking, the world could support those cars, but there would be many, many problems that this leads to. Catastrophic problems. First off, I'd like to cite an article written by BBC Science Focus that I could not find an author to. The article is titled The Thought Experiment: What if every person on Earth had a car? I'll include a link to this article in the description. As the article states, there are only 1.2 billion cars in the world today, and 7.5 billion people. If every person had a car, there would be several issues. 7.5 billion cars would occupy 26 million kilometers of road, about half the total length of all roads worldwide. As the article states, cars normally only spend about 5% of their time on the road network, but there aren't 7.1 billion parking spaces either. Long story short, in a world where every person was a car instead of a person, everything would be different. We couldn't have our same states, our same countries, our same roads. The world's structure would drastically change. 90% of it would be roads. Not only that, but consider, roads weren't developed until cars were developed, and if we're meant to think that cars have always existed in the world of cars, that means that there was a time where there were simply no roads, which doesn't make sense. My point is that the real world couldn't withstand 7.5 billion cars. We wouldn't be able to produce the required resources. We wouldn't be able to have the space for all of them. And that's not counting, new cars, because cars don't die and become, waste. They still exist. There's junkyards full of old cars. So you're very quickly looking at something that doesn't make any sense. Half the road space in the world would be taken up by the cars. I don't think you could imagine how impossible that is. What I mean to say is that the easy write-off argument that the cars world is a simple shoe-in for our world, just take everything about our world and replace the people with cars, is physically impossible. There is not enough space in the world, not enough roads, to allow everything to look and work the exact same as it does for us, but with cars instead. Meaning there cannot be 7 billion cars during 2005, when the first Cars movie takes place. And if the population is suddenly drastically decreased, then history cannot have gone the same way it did for us. The Cars world, our world, these two timelines, these two worlds are not identical. They can't be. There's more. The Pope is the key to all of this. See, if the population is different than it was in our world, history would be entirely different. There would have to be something we could point to that is definitive proof that history in the Cars universe is different than history in our universe in a major way. And there is. In Cars 2, the Pope is shown attending a race. That car's name? Pope Pinion IV. The actual Pope at the time was Pope Benedict XVI. It would have been extremely easy for Cars to either name this character Pope Benedict XVI, or at least change it to something like, Pope Fender Benedict XVI, or something car-related. At the very least, someone the 16th to show that it's meant to be the same Pope. But they didn't. This is a completely incorrect Pope. And what's interesting about that is that the popes aren't chosen based on a schedule like the president. You can't say something as simple as, well, maybe this is just a stand-in for Pope Benedict, because a new pope is only chosen after the previous one dies. Pope Pinion being a completely different pope than real life means that we don't have any idea when the previous pope died. This is a completely different pope, and it is not one-to-one with real life. This is definitive proof that history is different. The Cars universe is not just our real world with cars instead of people. It can't be, because history absolutely must be different. And if that's the case, the world would not develop in an identical fashion to how it did for us. Suddenly, the theory that humans had to exist is back on the menu. Even if cars do have brains, even if they have door handles for no reason in particular, even if there's an explanation for nearly everything that doesn't involve humans, there's no explanation for their existence within a culture that is remarkably human, and for their continued support of a world that exists just as ours does, if their history absolutely had to be different. So what's going on here? Well, I think we have our answer. Not to what the cars are, but to why they exist in the way that they do. The entire point of this video, the actual theory itself, cars live in a crude facsimile of our world, history, and culture. They are mimicking humanity. I do not believe Doc Hudson won the Piston Cup in 1951. I believe he won it in the time that the Cars characters recognize as 1951. Their 1951, a time that probably happened long after the real world 1951. The Cars learned French because it was part of the culture that left the world behind. They inherited languages that the people that existed before used. Their customs and practices didn't develop naturally through biology. They developed by mimicking humanity. It's the reason cars have door handles and windows, because that was simply how it was done. It's why there's a Pope car, why there's a Queen Elizabeth car. None of that has any realistic reason to exist. It shouldn't exist, and yet it does. Not through the work of history, but because they're copying us. In Cars on the Road, Mater and Lightning meet a group of hunters looking for cryptids, including Bigfoot and Mothman. Interestingly enough, Bigfoot only makes sense if it's a humanoid creature, as cars don't have feet. Yet they don't fully seem to get this, as they're tricked into thinking a monster truck is Bigfoot. Similarly, the name Mothman has obvious humanoid connotations. It doesn't make sense for Mothman to be a car. The word man comes from the Old English word man, M-A-N-N, meaning person or human being. So why do they call them these things, despite expecting them to be cars? Why would they call them Bigfoot and Mothman if they're neither man nor have feet? Well, because obviously they didn't come up with these terms. The terms were given to them by the history and the culture that lived before them. Bigfoot existed from a culture that should be forgotten, but the Cars have inherited it and made it their own. Now they fear something called Bigfoot that only exists in blurry photographs, just like we do. Carhenge, the world's largest lug nut, sumo wrestling, none of it has explicit purpose in the Cars universe, except to mimic human life. After all, isn't that kind of why the animators made any of these things in the first place, as references to things we know? Again, in the show, Lightning and Mater make it to a dinosaur museum where they see dinosaur cars that supposedly existed long ago. I don't believe this is even possible, considering the dinosaur cars in question were meant to be primitive creatures, and there are several references to cars being built and manufactured, not born naturally. Dinosaur cars couldn't exist. These massive titans couldn't have built themselves. And why would they be designed to look like dinosaurs rather than cars? The cars in the Cars universe don't take after animals or creatures. Tractors are this universe's version of cows, so why would massive dinosaur-like vehicles exist in the first place? Unless, of course, they didn't, and the entire point of the Dinosaur Museum is meant to be a sort of mirror to our museums and our dinosaurs. They saw the way we did it and they made it their own, even though none of that actually happened. There's actually evidence for this being true. Look at Dynaco, the gasoline company in Cars. Their logo is a dinosaur, noticeably a crude drawing of a dinosaur. Notice that as you go back and look at the older Dynaco logos throughout history, you'll see that the dinosaur depictions get more and more realistic. Because as history went on, the depictions of dinosaurs as they really were got replaced by the car versions of dinosaurs most of them believe today. You see the dinosaurs on the Dynaco logos? They aren't cars. They're biological dinosaurs with feet. Because in the Cars universe, their culture, beliefs, and world were all inherited from us. They've spent their lives mimicking us. Now, I don't want you to roll your eyes and tell me that this sounds like another nonsense, cynical, dark theory about the secret evil horrors of a Pixar film. Because I actually think this is kind of touching. It seems clear that at some point in the history of the Cars universe, humanity was either wiped out or fled the planet, leaving everything behind. I've seen several people say that, apparently, according to Pixar theory, the humans went to the Wall-E ship. I don't know how much I believe that, but just food for thought. I'm definitely not the only person who worries about legacy. Not just what I'll leave behind personally, but what everyone will leave behind when we're gone. What would happen to our culture, our art, our beliefs, if one day everything just ended and we were all wiped out? The Cars franchise offers a refreshing, kind of heartwarming suggestion that everything we leave behind could be picked up and continued by someone else. The Cars and Cars discover everything we left behind and decide it's good enough that it's worth continuing, making into their own thing. And honestly, as silly as this video is, as obviously crazy as this theory is, as much as you're probably thinking there's no way this was intentional, it's kind of a nice thought to have, isn't it? So that's that. The Cars universe is basically a reverse Flintstone situation. The human world was taken over by sentient cars who create a mimicry of everything we've made. They've continued our cultures, traditions, and beliefs, all while making them, well, car-themed. Well, this was a fun one. I didn't want to stretch it out too long. I think the Toy Story video was around 30 minutes. I didn't want this one to be too long because I don't have enough to say. I really hope that you guys enjoy these. Like, I wrote these and I'm like, oh, I hope they don't think that I'm just trying to make, another silly video. Like, oh, I'll get them this time. Oh, I like these. I had a really fun time. Well, watching through Cars, as embarrassing as it is to admit, to get the stuff for this video. I just want to extend a special thanks to all my patrons, whose names are on screen right now. Thank you so much. And a special thanks for those in the Spooky Superstar tier. Flat Out Disaster, My Name is Velk, Lex.Ham, Handyman, T Steel, and Jimmy Wetzel. Thank you guys so much for supporting me. I really appreciate it, and I will continue to try putting out as much content as humanly possible on the Patreon page so that you guys feel that it's worth it. Thank you again. I Do I think that the animators necessarily intended it? Again, it's one of those things where somebody could have thought about it, right? But it's more so the fun of coming up with a theory that technically has to be right. One thing about this video compared to the Toy Story video is with the Toy Story video, it was more, X is true and Y is true, therefore Z is true. Where with this one, it's, X can't be true and Y can't be true, therefore we could come to the conclusion that Z is true. Like, they couldn't have the same population as us, therefore they couldn't have the same exact history as us, therefore none of it makes sense and humans had to exist. And so I think that there might be some of you who think this one's a little bit sketchier in terms of the believability, but I think it's fun and I had a good time doing it, and that's what matters most. So if you want more, I got so many comments on the Toy Story one telling me to make more fun theories about Pixar and stuff, and so that's kind of why I did this one. If you want more theories like that, please tell me in the comments below. My name is Spookydood. Thank you so much for watching. Make sure to like, subscribe, share the video, and also subscribe to me on Patreon, and I will see you next time.